A blistering, sanguinary light pulsed at the edge of his vision. A terrifying crimson glow ignited in the depths of his eyes as reason fled. Black vapor coiled around the dragon's colossal form, the heart of a hurricane waiting to be unleashed. Just then, the half-healed wound on his right talon, agitated by the storm of raging elements, tore open anew. A single drop of dragon's blood, incandescent as a liquid ember, seeped from the gash. It formed a perfect sphere before falling with a soft patter to the ground below, landing directly upon one of the lines etched into the arcane sigil. A sharp hiss sliced through the air. In that instant, the searing heat locked within the blood drop vaporized the sigil's strange, glowing line, causing it to snap. The light from the formation dimmed abruptly. The dragon's pupils contracted, and a sliver of lucidity pierced the red haze. He violently wrenched his claw back, but the bloody mist of the sigil had transformed into 1,000 grasping threads, wrapping tightly around his limb, refusing to let go. The dragon's irises narrowed to razor-thin slits, a flicker of irritation crossing his abyssal gaze. The power of the void churned restlessly within him, a furnace of untempered rage and a murderous urge that burned for release. Such petty human tricks, always. The silver-white behemoth threw back its head, and a roar saturated with raw, untamed power ripped from its throat. The earth itself trembled. Creatures of the deep, caught in the overwhelming pressure of his might, shivered and flattened themselves to the ground, helpless against the primal fear that seized their very blood. Control was a tool for the weak. The strong needed only to annihilate. He opened his maw. Between the seams of his silver-white chest plates, a river of molten gold and red light flowed, tracing patterns that were both intricate and ancient. A moment later, dragonfire, utterly unrestrained, erupted forth. In any other conflict, he would have instinctively tempered the purity of his flames. But not this time. He had been ripped from his slumber by mortals. Stripped of his power, his hoard vanished. They had not only stolen and wasted his treasures, but they had also relentlessly sought to harm, use, and manipulate him. And now they had forced this transformation. He hadn't even had the chance to add his favorite human to his collection before being compelled to leave. And no more of their snacks, video games, or ice cream. The sheer audacity was infuriating. From a distance, Caleb felt a shift in the world and turned his head toward the deep ravine. The sky-searing light reflected in his sapphire eyes. An inferno, threaded with gold, swept across the landscape with world-shattering force, a roaring, galloping tide of pure destruction. The scorched sigil on the blackened earth was instantly erased. The flames were so ferocious that rock melted into magma, water evaporated into steam, and the very air warped like heat haze. The toxic fog vanished as half the sky was painted the color of blood. The eye of the abyss, the source of the rift, held for a few seconds longer, its center constricting in a parody of terror before a web of cracks spread across its surface. It was incinerated into charcoal. It was as if a tactical nuke had been detonated with the dragon at its core. Miles of terrain were flattened, including the chasm itself. The steep cliffs crumbled, and every abyssal creature was reduced to ash before it could flee. A shockwave, powerful as a hurricane, radiated outward, leaving nothing but sterilized devastation in its wake. An eternity seemed to pass before the conflagration subsided. The light that had threatened to consume the world slowly faded, leaving only a shimmering, high-temperature afterglow in the air. Amidst the blackened ruins, a massive slab of rock was blasted upward from below. A man with silver hair, using a long sword as a support, slowly pushed himself to his feet. He had never been so battered. Thick, red blood trickled from his forehead, matting his silver lashes together, forcing him to squint. His clothes were incinerated rags, and his cascade of silver hair was stained with ash and dust, the ends scorched a brittle black. Caleb surveyed the scene. He could barely recognize his surroundings. The chasm's toxic mists were gone, the towering peaks surrounding it leveled. Only a wasteland of charred rock and debris remained under a bleak, night-drowned sky. A dead, silent plain stretched before him, devoid of any sign of life. But Caleb knew the man in the dark robes was not dead. If he was of Caleb's bloodline, he would share the same resistance to dragonfire. Caleb himself had survived. So had the cultist. Yet, Caleb did not search for him. Something far more urgent demanded his attention. He pushed himself up with his sword, climbing with difficulty from the rubble. A dull agony pulsed from his core, a protest from what felt like several broken ribs. A trickle of blood escaped his lips, which he quickly wiped away. The pain did not slow him. He walked step by step in the direction of the residual magic, the air thick with the smell of smoke and fire under the oppressive weight of the sky. He walked for what felt like an age until he finally reached the epicenter. To say it looked like a small asteroid had struck would be an understatement. A perfectly arced crater plunged downwards, hundreds of yards across and dozens deep. Unlike the periphery, the crater's interior was swept clean of debris. The ground was a canvas of deep, burnished black. And there, in the very center, lay a slender shape of white. Clean, pale, and naked, Caleb stopped at the edge of the pit. His cold eyes, hidden beneath the drying blood, looked on with a terrible, dispassionate cruelty. The sword of solidified magic in his palm dissipated into nothing. The man slowly, deliberately, placed a gloved hand on the hilt of the long sword at his waist. The blade seemed to sense his intent, letting out a low, hungry hum. Asher was disturbed by the sunlight on his face. It was too bright. The insistent light on his eyelids turned them a translucent pink. He frowned, turning over and burying his head deeper into the bedding. A faint, distant sound brushed against his hearing, but when he tried to grasp its meaning, it slipped away. Being awake was being awake. There was no returning to sleep now. He stretched languidly, a feeling of having slept for a very, very long time washing over him. His dreams had been a kaleidoscope of fractured, blurry images. His lashes trembled as his eyes slowly opened. Where was this place? Everything felt unfamiliar, perhaps a side effect of his prolonged dream state. Clean sunlight streamed through the window, dappling the white sheets with flecks of gold. The air smelled of clean lavender soap, peaceful and serene. He felt a profound sense of confusion. As he sat up, his bones seemed to creak and groan like rusty hinges. The quilt slid from his body, revealing the pale, slender lines of his shoulders, collarbones, and chest. The fine texture of the fabric felt strange against his skin. He realized he was unclothed. That odd sound came again, a faint metallic clinking from beneath the covers. An idea flickered through his mind, too fast to catch. He lifted the quilt. His legs were long and slim, the joints touched with a faint pink that gave them the smooth, lustrous quality of jade in the sunlight. His ankles were fine-boned and delicate, and clasped around one of them was a silver metal cuff, etched with complex characters. A chain extended from it to the headboard, where it was securely fastened. The sound was the metal links shifting with his movement. Asher froze, staring dumbly at the shackle. A storm of chaos howled through his mind. What? The silver chain gleamed, looking more like an ornament than a restraint. But as a glint of light caught his eye, it was like a blade slicing through the fog in his memory. The moments before he lost consciousness flooded back. Being forced into his true form before a crowd of onlookers, the erupting volcano, the nearly mature abyssal rift, and the uncontrollable, blinding rage. Then what happened? He supposed he had passed out from exhaustion, but something critical felt missing. He stared at the chain, his mind a rusty machine grinding slowly into motion. It felt like starting a video game, dozing off for a second, and waking up to a blood-red game over on the screen. He tentatively reached down and tugged on the silver chain. Clinked but held fast. He frowned, a layer of hard, silver-white scales covering his fingertips, sharp enough to shatter steel. As he touched the chain, the intricate runes etched upon it flared with a faint light. He hissed and pulled his hand back. Though there was no visible wound, a small patch of his skin was red and irritated. This shackle was clearly designed for a dragon, capable of suppressing his innate power. Was this the work of the department? That didn't make sense. As a team led by a dragon slayer, shouldn't their first act upon finding a dragon be to kill it while it was weak? Especially after witnessing his transformation to human form. There could be no mistake. He was utterly bewildered. He suddenly remembered something else and cautiously lifted the quilt for another look. A complicated, indescribable expression crossed his face. One other question remained. Why was he naked? The abyssal rift was gone. Gone wasn't quite the right word. Obliterated was more accurate. Typically, even after the eye of the abyss was destroyed, an unhealable scar would remain on the land. This time, the fissure was simply replaced by a massive crater, the ambient heat lingering for days. At least the abyssal creatures had been thoroughly cleansed. The higher-ups in the district released no official information about the cause of the disaster, but the fiery glow that had consumed the sky that night was visible for thousands of miles. Rumors of new government superweapons, undiscovered monsters, and religious conspiracies swirled among the populace. Unlike the wild speculation of the public, the existence of dragons was no longer a secret to the ruling echelons of the various sectors. They began to hound the Department of Paranormal Defense for answers, cloaking their own avaricious motives in the guise of public safety. Every sector wanted a piece of this. Even the opportunistic leaders from the Evans sector tried to muddy the waters, hoping to squeeze information from the department about the dragon's whereabouts, its strength, its weaknesses, and whether it could be killed. The department's response was always the same. They didn't know. This was the truth. The department's leadership was as much in the dark as anyone. They were unaware that their most elite combat team had not only witnessed the dragon's transformation but also knew its human identity. On this matter, Vera had respected her commander's decision and reported nothing. Her subordinates were disciplined professionals who knew what to say and what to keep silent. After years of fighting alongside Caleb, they were all tight-lipped. The battle at the caldera had left most of them with injuries of varying severity, and they were now receiving full medical support from the department. For them, the past few days felt like a surreal dream. Nobody could have imagined that the gentle, harmless-looking young man was actually a legendary dragon. It was a revelation on par with a nuclear explosion. Thinking about it now still felt unreal, like a figment of their own imagination. And as for their leader hiding a dragon, only 3 people knew: Vera, Dr. Julian Finch, and Caleb himself. Vera and Julian held opposing views on the matter. Despite numerous arguments, neither had managed to persuade the other. As for Caleb, no one knew what he was thinking. Since that day at the volcano, their commander had become even more mercurial and unpredictable. No one knew what went through Caleb's mind when he discovered Asher was a dragon, or what turbulent currents churned beneath his placid surface. Why he had gone to slay the dragon alone, only to bring it back unconscious, remained a mystery. What he planned to do next was a question neither Vera nor Julian dared to ask. In his lab, Julian was engrossed in analyzing a drop of dragon's blood. It was a viscous, crimson bead, shot through with faint golden threads, pulsing with an unseen power. While making notes, he was questioning Caleb about his family's ancient texts. Caleb, sitting nearby, offered only terse, dispassionate replies. Then, he glanced down at his phone and abruptly stood up. The sudden movement startled Julian. Caleb picked up the coat he had draped over the chair. His expression was as still and unreadable as ever, but in the depths of his blue eyes, a dark, formless undercurrent seemed to swirl. His voice was low. He said the boy was awake. It took Julian a few seconds to realize who he was. By the time he did, Caleb was already striding out of the room, his tall, straight back disappearing from view. Julian sighed and returned to his research. A moment later, something struck him as odd. He wondered how Caleb knew so quickly that Asher was awake. Then Julian remembered the surveillance cameras Caleb had requisitioned from him a few days prior. His expression slowly shifted into something more complicated. While he understood the necessity, he couldn't help but feel it was a bit invasive. When Caleb pushed open the door, Asher was hunched over, studying the shackle on his ankle with a look of utter bafflement. Clear sunlight poured through the window, bathing the boy's pale back in a soft glow. His neck was long, his spine a slender, flexible curve. His shoulder blades shifted like birds beneath a thin layer of skin, and his spine formed a delicate valley that disappeared into the fabric of the sheets. The sunlight seemed to spill into the dimples of his lower back. The chain clinked with his movements, the crisp sound sharp in the quiet room. Caleb took a step forward. Asher heard the footstep and straightened up as if startled, whipping his head around. His pupils involuntarily constricted. Caleb? Even though he had anticipated it, seeing the man still sent a jolt of strange surprise through Asher. The silver-haired man walked forward, his light blue eyes having the quality of thawing ice in the sunlight, deep and cold. His gaze landed on Asher, heavy and silent. For every step Caleb took forward, Asher instinctively shifted an inch back, until his back was against the wall with nowhere else to go. Caleb leaned down, his fingertips brushing the silver chain attached to the bed frame. His long lashes were lowered, obscuring the look in his eyes. But for some reason, Asher was reminded of that day amidst the smoke and volcanic ash, of Caleb with a blood-stained sword in hand. His pupils shrunk to pinpricks, his eyes terrifyingly cold. He swallowed instinctively. As a dragon, he was rarely afraid of anything. But now, he felt a flicker of apprehension. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the unknown emotion raging in the other man's eyes that set him on edge. Caleb asked him in a calm voice if he liked it. Asher blinked, not expecting that to be the first question. He thought it would be an accusation, something about him being a dragon or having deceived him. He was momentarily distracted, but Caleb didn't seem to mind. He reached out, taking the chain in his hand. The metallic sound made the silence in the room feel taut. Caleb slowly, methodically, began to wrap the chain around his own palm, explaining that there were few things in the world that could bind a dragon, and that most of them were in his family's possession. Asher could feel the chain tightening, the pull on his ankle increasing. He tried to shrink back, but the wall was unyielding. He finally seemed to realize something and stammered out a question about their location. Caleb informed him they were at his home, the old family estate, to be precise. His chillingly remote eyes were locked on the boy. Before Asher could process this, the chain was pulled taut. A strong force yanked him forward. He tried to scramble away, but a hot, dry hand clamped around his slender ankle, effortlessly dragging him across the bed. Caleb held the boy's bare foot in one hand while he leaned down, his silver hair spilling like a cold spring over Asher's skin, eliciting an ominous shiver. He had heard that Asher liked the color silver, he murmured. The man's long fingers, with their hot palm, moved slowly between the boy.